The broadcast of the regular meeting of the Heritage Preservation Commission will now begin.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this live broadcast of our virtual meeting of the December 1st, 2020 regular meeting of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission. This meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota Statute Section 13D.021 due to the declared local health pandemic. For the record, my name is Madeline Sundberg, and I serve as chair of the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission. I will now call this meeting to order and ask the clerk to call the roll so we may verify a presence of the quorum.
Bjornberg.
Present.
Fritz.
Present.
Howard. Johnson.
Present.
Sandbolt.
Present.
Stady.
Here.
Sundberg.
Present.
Vandereyck. Here. That's 7 present.
Thank you. Let the record reflect that we do have quorum. With that, we will proceed to our agenda, a copy of which was posted for public access to the city's legislative information management system, which is available at lims.minneapolismn.gov. Our first order of business is to adopt the agenda for this meeting. We'll work from the agendas that are available online. I'll go through the agenda and sort out what items will be continued to a future meeting, what items will be discussed, and what items will be placed on the consent agenda to be approved as recommended by staff without further discussion. Item number 4 is the 2021 Heritage Preservation Commission meeting calendar. That item will be on the consent agenda unless someone wants to speak in opposition to or modify the staff recommendations. Commissioners, did anybody wish to speak in opposition to the calendar? I don't see any at this time. Item number 5 is the 2020 Heritage Preservation Commission Annual Report. That item will be discussed. Item number 6 is 614 15th Street East, Ward 7, a certificate of appropriateness. That item will be discussed. So the proposed agenda is item 4, the meeting calendar, will be on the consent agenda. Item 5, the annual report, will have staff presentation, commission discussion and action. And item number 6, 614 15th Street East, will have staff presentation, public comment, and commission discussion and action. Commissioners, may I have a motion to approve the proposed agenda?
Commissioner Johnson, so moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Is there a second?
Commissioner Sandbolt, second.
Thank you, Commissioner Sandbolt. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on that motion.
Bjornberg.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye. Aye.
Sandbolt.
Aye.
Stady.
Aye.
Sundberg.
Aye.
Vandereyck. Aye. 7 yeas.
Thank you. The agenda is approved. Our next order of business will be to approve the minutes from our October 27th, 2020 meeting. May I have a motion to approve those minutes?
Bjornberg so moves.
Thank you, Commissioner Bjornberg. Is there a second?
Johnson seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Bjornberg.
Aye.
Fritz.
Aye.
Johnson.
Aye.
Sandbolt.
Abstain.
Stady,
Aye.
Sundberg,
Aye.
Van Dyke.
Aye.
That's 6 yeas.
Thank you. The minutes are approved. Let's see. So before I open the hearing to public comments, let me summarize the process for conducting a public hearing in this virtual format. The process for the public hearing will be as followed. First, we'll act the consent agenda items we just set. Once the consent agenda items are approved, the commission is done with those items. The applicant, they can contact planning staff for next steps. After the consent agenda items are approved, we'll take each remaining agenda item in order. First, the planning staff will present its report and commissioners may ask questions of staff. Then we will hear from the applicant and commissioners may ask questions of the applicant. After that, I open the public hearing and we'll invite public comment. We will be taking speakers in the order they pre-registered. If there are any, speakers will be limited to 2 minutes. We'll ask that after your name is called, you state your name and address for the record and then proceed with your comments. After we've completed the list of any pre-registered speakers, we will see if there are any other speakers in the queue who may have called in. In order to activate your microphone, you'll need to press *6 on your phone and wait to hear the recorded message before you start talking. So again, we'll take the list of pre-registered speakers and then open the floor. After the public comments are complete, I will close the hearing. Commissioners will deliberate and act on the applications before us. So I will now open the public hearing on the consent agenda items. So again, this is the 2021 meeting calendar for the Heritage Preservation Commission. Is there any opposition to staff recommendations for this item? Seeing none, I will now close the public hearing on the consent agenda items. Commissioners, may I have a motion to approve staff findings and recommendations for these items?
Van Dyke, so moved.
Thank you, Commissioner Van Dyke. Is there a second?
Johnson seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask the clerk to call a roll on the motion.
Bjornberg,
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Sandbolt,
Aye.
Stady,
Aye.
Van Dyke,
Aye.
Sundberg.
Aye.
That's 7 yeas.
Thank you. The consent agenda passes. So that is item number 4, the meeting calendar is approved as recommended by staff on the agenda. Moving on to our discussion items. Our first item is item number 5, the 2020 Heritage Preservation Commission Annual Report. The staff report will be presented by Andrea Burke.
Thank you. Good, evening, afternoon, Madam Chair and Commissioners. I am Andrea Burke, and I'm the supervisor for the Heritage Preservation team. I wanted to give you a quick overview of our CLG annual report. I know we normally don't do this in meetings, but I kind of wanted to get into the practice of this to start just giving you guys an idea of everything that we've been up to over the last year. Every year, to be a certified local government, the state requires us to prepare an annual report that shows us what we've been up to, some of the grants we've applied for, the applications we've heard, any appeals we received. Thank you. You can stay on this slide for a sec. This year, CPED staff has completed 3 designation studies. We have completed one for Joyce Memorial Methodist Church that was designated as a landmark. We have also received completed one for Lyndhurst Residential Historic District, and that was also designated by City Council in July. Next slide, please. And we also completed one for Glendale Townhouses Historic District. That one has not gone to City Council yet. That hasn't gone to the business inspections Zoning and Housing Committee yet. This came through right as COVID, and there was the stay-at-home orders, and at the request of the council member, this one has been tabled for a while until it's just been tabled for a while, is all I understand. So that one has not been officially designated yet, but we completed the study on it. We have also completed several grant projects. We did not apply for any CLG funding in 2019, but we did receive the final report for the fiscal year 2018 CLG grant that we applied for to update the city's street and railway context study as it relates to Minneapolis streetcar commercial buildings. We also, in fiscal year 2019, which would cover this CLG annual report, received the final deliverables for the legacy grant that we applied for the Minneapolis in the Modern Era Historic Context Study. That was a huge project with a great product, and I'm working to get that up on our web once I get a couple extra minutes. But this context study is an excellent first step into looking into modernism as a larger thematic context, as well as the architecture in the city of Minneapolis. Next slide, please. And we also have received sort of preliminarily right now an African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund grant. I'm in the process of completing the paperwork to execute that agreement. That was more in July 2020, but that's also in the fiscal year for the CLG grant cycle, or CLG annual report cycle. We have also the HPC has commented favorably on 5 National Register nominations, and I have them listed before you in the presentation today. The Zinn's Master Baking Company building, Sound 80 Studio, Northrop King and Company Complex. Next slide, please. The Laurel Apartments and the Aaron Carlson Corporation, and I do believe almost all of those have now been listed in the National Register based on the communication I've received from the state. Next slide, please. And just to give you a quick overview of everything that we, kind of all the numbers that we've gone through, we have completed 25 certificate of appropriateness applications in this fiscal year. HPC has reviewed 6 historic variance applications, no appeals of the planning director, 6 appeals of the HPC, 6 applications for demolition of historic resource. Those are potential historic resources. And we have also reviewed approximately about 131 certificate of no change applications for minor alterations to historic properties. And we have reviewed 184 wrecking permits. So these numbers aren't as high as some of our previous years. I think COVID has had a bit of an impact on that with some of the construction, but still relatively high considering everything that's happened in 2020. So it's been a productive year. We've gotten through a lot, especially in the terms of designation studies. So I wanted to just give a summary of our what staff has been up to over the last year, as well as you to give you a summary of it. But that concludes my presentation, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Are there any questions for staff? I think it is really impressive to see how much work is completed by staff and how much is reviewed by the commission on an annual basis. There's been a lot of development over the last few years, and I agree that the numbers are down a bit, probably because of the pandemic, but it's still impressive to me to see how many projects move through. If there isn't any questions for staff, would somebody like to make a motion?
This is Commissioner Johnson. I'd like to make a motion to approve the annual report.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Is there a second?
Sandbolt, second.
Thank you, Commissioner Sandbolt. Any last discussion? Seeing none, I would like to ask the clerk to call the roll on the motion.
Bjornberg.
Aye.
Fritz,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Sandbolt,
Aye.
Stady,
Aye.
Vandereyk,
Aye.
Sundberg.
Aye.
That's 7 yeas.
Thank you. That motion passes. Okay. Our next item is item number 6, 614 15th Street East, Ward 7, a certificate of appropriateness. The staff report will be presented by Andrea Burke.
Thank you. Good evening again. Andrea Burke, supervisor of the Historic Preservation Team in CPED. I am presenting tonight the Certificate of Appropriateness application for the demolition of the First Church of Christ Scientist, a locally designated historic landmark. Next slide, please. The First Church of Christ Scientist is located at 614 15th Street East in the Elliott Park neighborhood just south of downtown Minneapolis. Next slide, please. The church was built in 1897 and was the first Christian Science church built in the state of Minnesota. Designed by Septimius J. Bowler, the church is a scaled-down version of Beaux-Arts classicism and Renaissance revival styles featuring the Doric order. A rear Sunday school addition was built in 1899, while other alterations include glass block infill on the primary elevation, some loss of the capitals, and the removal of the former inscription on the front portico. The building was both designated by the Minneapolis HPC and listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1986 for significance in the areas of architecture and religion. The First Church of Christ Scientist was the first building of its denomination in the state and an example of the religion's early emphasis on architectural quality over traditional religious form. Next slide, please. The property has been vacant since 2006 and has seen significant physical deterioration. The current owners purchased the property in 2015 and had developed the site adjacent to the east into 6-story apartments. In December 2018, the current owners proposed to install temporary interior shoring to stabilize the former church building in anticipation of snow loading for that year. CPED's administrative approval in February of 2019 required a rehabilitation plan as a condition, but the applicant submitted a mothballing and stabilization plan in August 2019 with a plan to develop a rehab plan within the next 10 years. Next slide, please. In the fall and early winter of 2019, demolition was proposed following the collapse of a retaining wall not connected to the building on the front elevation adjacent to the right-of-way. The applicant is proposing to demolish the church and use the site as amenity park space and patio space for the adjacent new property at called 1400 Park Avenue Apartments. Quite simply, demolition of a locally designated historic landmark does not meet the findings for a certificate of appropriateness. Next slide, please. Demolition will remove all remaining physical vestiges of the historic property and is not consistent with the Secretary of the Interior standards, as the standards recommend repair, stabilization, and rehabilitation. The demolition is also not consistent with the applicable policies of Minneapolis 2040, whose policies discuss protection of historic resources from demolition and ensuring maintenance of historic properties. Next slide, please. There are additional findings for destruction in Chapter 599 for a landmark or a property in a historic district that involve an unsafe or dangerous condition and reasonable alternatives to destruction. Under unsafe or dangerous condition, the applicants state that the First Church of Christ Scientist poses an unsafe and dangerous condition to the public because it is not structurally stable and in immediate danger of collapse. Next slide, please. Specific structural deficiencies noted include the failing roof trusses in the sanctuary, failing masonry around the sanctuary and Sunday school addition, and failing structural columns supporting the front portico. Staff understands that the building is in severe disrepair. However, it is unclear whether or not the building is in imminent danger of collapse based on the documents provided by the applicant's structural engineer. I will let the applicant's representative explain their case further on this matter. And then 2, reasonable alternatives. Next slide, please. The applicants claim that there are no reasonable alternatives to the demolition of the building, citing the cost of renovation being too high for the usable area, even with historic tax credits. In determining whether reasonable alternatives exist, Chapter 599 states the Commission shall consider the significance, integrity, and economic value or usefulness of the property. Under significance and integrity, the church clearly has significance and historic integrity as it was locally designated and listed in the National Register since 1986. For economic value and or usefulness, the applicant completed an economic analysis of the building, including a comparison of costs from rehabilitation to demolition, as well as developing a pro forma for operation of the building. In terms of, you'll see on your screen a quick summary of the costs in March 2019. The rehab price was listed at $3,627,765 to include site work, a new addition, renovation, and other construction costs. The proposed use was an office building. The 2020 rehab price is $4,200,958,000 to include the rehabilitation and reuse of the church without the addition. The estimate notes that includes the rehab for the building exterior to meet HPC requirements, though this hasn't been verified, and to make the interior space marketable as office space, as well as meeting building code. And then the 2020 demolition cost is $423,340, including converting it into a patio for the adjacent tenants of the apartment building next door. The pro forma identified the applicant's equity contribution of $1,630,671, historic tax credits estimated in the amount of $1,018,187, and not yet identified grants of $1,250,000. The applicant concluded that even if the funding sources for rehabilitation included state and federal historic rehabilitation tax credits, as well as theoretical grant dollars in the amount of $1,250,000, the property would still operate at a loss with even with favorable returns as an office. Converting a former church into office space may not be the most compatible use given the way each space generally functions. The cost estimate for the rehabilitation appears to be a good faith effort on behalf of the applicant to examine the necessary cost to bring this building into a fully functioning and usable state. CPED understands the difficulty in reusing historic churches. However, it's possible another use may be more suitable to this type of building, though it's hard to tell. Next slide, please. In conclusion, many historic buildings in serious states of disrepair have been rehabilitated into successful functioning sources of revenue. The Minneapolis HPC deemed this building worthy of protection back in 1986. Stabilization and rehabilitation are possible with the First Church of Christ Scientist. The significance and integrity combined with the possibilities to rehabilitate this building into use that may better fit its layout show that there are reasonable alternatives to destruction. As such, the CPED recommends that the HPC adopt staff findings for the application by Minnesota 1400 Park LLC for the property located at 614 15th Street East, the First Church of Christ Scientist, and deny the certificate of appropriateness to demolish the First Church of Christ Scientist, a locally designated historic landmark. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions, and the applicant's representative is here to speak tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Are there any questions for staff? I don't see any at this time. So with that, I will open the public hearing for this item. I believe the applicant is here. If you could please press *6 on your phone and wait to hear the recorded message to activate your microphone so we can hear you, and then state your name and address for the record.
My name is Dan Hunt. The address is 7101 York Avenue South, Edina, Minnesota.
Thank you.
Shall I continue?
Yep.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to comment on two assertions staff made in their report. First, staff has not shown that destruction is not necessary. And two, staff has not shown there is a reasonable economic value or usefulness of the existing structure. Let me elaborate on the second point first. Staff's comments that renovated use is not the most compatible with the neighborhood. I agree. However, it is the most financially feasible use. All other uses would cost nearly the same, but return significantly less revenue. The staff's statement that many historic buildings in serious states of disrepair have been rehabilitated into successful functioning sources of revenue is true. However, it does not address the facts presented in their application that in this instance, there is no viable use. Staff goes on to state that because there are uses, quote, that may better fit its layout, there are reasonable alternatives to destruction, end quote. This is a false conclusion. If there is no economic use, there are no reasonable alternatives, even if another use is a better fit for the layout. Regarding the first point, the city building official, Kenneth Stalick, stated that the building, quote, possesses a safety threat to the public and that it is an imminent danger of collapse. Staff's argument that because the building is still standing today is not an argument that it is unsafe, because every building that collapses was standing the day before it collapsed. Nearly 12 occupants of the apartment building to the west go to bed every night 8 feet from this church. As there is no economic use for the church today, and certainly without the state historic cash credits available after June 2021, the building will sit mothballed and a blight on the neighborhood. The safety of the residents next door, as well as the public, is the owner's primary concern. Demolition is the only viable option available, will make the area safe and be an immediate neighborhood improvement. Any additional documentation of this historic structure would be made prior to demolition as a recorded copy. Also, the owner is willing to maintain the facade of the church if the rest of the building can be demolished. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any questions for the applicant? I don't see any at this time. Is there anyone, there's nobody in the queue, but is there anyone else on the line wishing to speak for or against this application? If so, please press *6. Oh, Commissioner Sandville, you have a question for the applicant.
Quick question. The south facade, the front facade, is that facade in any better or different condition than the other 4 facades?
It is in a more expensive condition to fix, only because it's more complicated. But the problem is not the facade. The problem is the roof. That's the costly component here. So if the roof collapses, then most of the facades will collapse.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the applicant? Doesn't seem like it. And appears that there's nobody else on the line. So with that, I will close the public hearing and open the commissioner discussion. Commissioners, concerns, comments on this proposed application? Oh wait, I'm pausing for a moment because I just remembered I'm supposed to state that there a letter came in at the last minute. And so if there is no objection, I would like to have that added into the public record for the proposal. Is that the direction staff needs? Is that sufficient?
Yes, that would be adequate.
Okay.
Yeah, you give the direction.
Okay. I don't want them to feel like their comment wasn't recorded. So if that could be added to public record. Commissioner Stady.
Thanks. I just had a quick question about precedent. Has there ever been a locally designated building approved to demolish? The Philander Prescott house is in my memory, but that was a long time ago, and I can't remember what the specifics are, but I think that one burned down or something. But yeah, that was just my question, if there's any precedent around approval of demolishing a locally designated building.
Andrea, do you know if we've approved the demolition of any actually designated buildings versus an eligible building?
Yes, most recently there were buildings within the St. Anthony Falls that were approved for demolition 4 years ago as part of the 200 Central project. In terms of an actual landmark that has been approved, since those are a little more scattered throughout the city, I don't have any off the top of my mind right now. It's too bad we lost our two long-standing institutional memory commissioners. I don't think I have my other long staff member on with me on this meeting tonight, but in terms of recent memory, it's the St. Anthony Falls properties that were demolished to make way for 200 Central.
Thank you, Andrea. Commissioner Stady, I think that is a good point. And I also think it's a little different to approve the demolition of a building in a district versus an individually designated landmark. We don't have a ton of individually designated landmarks. It had to really stand out to reach that point. And I guess I'm feeling a little bit, looking at the photos and everything, like this is seeming to me sort of like a demolition by neglect situation. If this building had been properly cared for when ownership was taken of it, I don't think it would have reached the point of deterioration it is currently showing. So I guess although I understand it is difficult to rehabilitate buildings, I know a bunch of us do this as our day jobs. We work as architects or in different fields of development where we rehabilitate historic buildings. And I know it's not easy, but I guess I'm feeling like they have not sufficiently proven the question of immediate danger of collapse, or that there aren't viable alternatives. Commissioner Van Der Eyck.
Thanks. I would tend to agree with everything you're saying, Chair Sundberg. I don't feel it meets the standard in that perspective. I'm concerned about the building. I mean, I feel like in general, this report is quite concerning. So I think what we have before us today is to make a decision as to whether or not this is meeting the standard of a demolition permit. of a historic resource, and I would say that I do not feel it does. So, but I want to say for the record that I'm concerned about the building too. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Vander Eyck. I agree. I'm concerned that I know that demolition by neglect is a difficult one to try to push back against, but my concern is that if it is allowed to continue to exist in this state without rehabilitation taking place, that, I mean, it won't last forever. We all know that. But I also agree with staff that there wasn't sufficient documentation from an engineer showing that it is an imminent issue. Commissioner Sandbolt.
I would agree with the statements that are being made. I feel like if we would approve this demolition, it sets a precedent for the demolition by neglect. Unfortunately, I feel like this has been a property that has been on, the register for a while, and owners were aware of that reality. And in order, to preserve these kinds of things, steps need to be taken along the way, and to just let things deteriorate to a point where it is potentially a danger. I'm worried that we're setting a precedent that that's a good way to go about getting approval for a demolition permit. And so I'm reluctant. I understand that this structure is potentially in a very dire situation, but I think there could have been steps taken to prevent it from getting this far. And unfortunately, I feel that we need to kind of stand the ground of these structures need to be protected. And if you let them go for too long, then it is more expensive to restore them. And that's unfortunate, but true.
Thank you, Commissioner Sandbolt. I agree that they, by pushing it off, it has become a more expensive project, but that it's certainly still feasible to repair it. And from listening to everybody's thoughts, it doesn't seem like anybody is questioning whether or not this is historic. It's one of our few landmarks. Looking at it from the exterior, I don't think anybody could walk down the street and think that this wasn't a historic building. It has such a unique architectural style. It really stands out from the surroundings. And I imagine envisioning it rehabilitated, it could be a real gem. It could be a really beautiful building. Well, I'm wondering if anybody has any last thoughts, or if somebody would like to make a motion.
This is Commissioner Johnson. I'll make a motion to deny the certificate of appropriateness to demolish the First Church of Christ Science.
80 seconds.
Thank you, Commissioner Johnson. Commissioner Stady, any further discussion? Seeing none, would the clerk please call the roll on the motion?
Bjornberg.
Aye.
Fritz. Oh, she abstained. Excuse me.
She abstains, yeah.
Johnson.
Aye.
Sandbolt.
Aye.
Stady.
Aye.
Vander Eyck.
Aye.
Sundberg.
Aye.
That's 6 yeas.
Thank you. That motion passes. The applicant may speak to staff about next steps tomorrow. That concludes our public hearing items. Commissioners or staff, are there any announcements or commission business to discuss? Andrea Burke.
Yeah, I have just, I think, one announcement in that we are conducting interviews for new commissioners to fill the 3/4 vacant open slots on the HPC coming up next year in 2021. We are conducting those this Wednesday and Friday, and shall hopefully have some selections by early next week. And we'll work on onboarding and training for, it's probably looking like it won't be the end of December, considering there's a 2-week council off week. And I have to, in order to take the commissioners through, I have to bring them before the city council. So it'll look like probably January by the time we are able to get them to start on their first meeting. So I will reach out to outgoing commissioners about that situation and their comfort level so we can maintain quorum in the next week here. And that is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. And I'd like to thank everybody for talking to people they knew who might be interested, because we had a good group of applicants that we'll be interviewing. Larger than we've seen in previous years. So I'd like to thank the people who are out there talking it up. Any other announcements or business? Doesn't seem like it. So with that, we've completed all items on the agenda for this meeting. I will again ask members and staff if there are any other matters to come before this meeting. There being no other business this meeting, if not and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. The next regular meeting of the HPC is December 15th, 2020. Thank you, everyone.